at the Southbury Church. Today we are going to have Marc Genest talk about Middle East politics. Before I introduce him, I want to remind people that if you're not on our mailing list, there's a clapboard out there, and you can put in your name and your email so you can get up to date on what we're about, all right? But now it's my pleasure to introduce Marc Genest. Marc Genest is the Forrest Sherman Professor of Public Policy and Strategy at the Naval War College. Okay, but first I want to give you a little background. Marc graduated from Naval War College, all right? Then he got a PhD at Georgetown. He came back and we snatched him up, and he was in the political science department at URI. And I had we had offices right next to one another. And he was a very popular teacher. The students loved him. They were always gathering outside his door. And then what happened is he wrote a wonderful book on political communication, and the War College snatched him up. So here he is. But he is the founding and co-director of the Naval War College's Center on Irregular Warfare and Allied Troops. He served as a civilian advisor in Afghanistan and received the Commander's Award from the Army as a special advisor to the commander of the Task Force Mountain Warrior. He has written numerous books and articles on international relations, strategic communication, and American foreign policy, and of course his famous book on political communication. So we have someone who's going to come in and help us do the slides, but I'm reminded we have to start probably at 5, so we'll start.
Thank you, Maureen. Now that you see me in my jacket, okay. First, it's a pleasure to be here. I want to thank Maureen for giving me a very simple, not very complicated situation to discuss in the Middle East. Thank you for that. I was hoping for Ukraine or something else. I have spent quite a bit of time in the Middle East. I've been, obviously, to Israel many times, to Gaza, and to the West Bank, as well as most of the Arab countries surrounding the area. I have good friends who are part of the Israeli Defense Forces, and I spent some time interviewing interesting individuals at Guantanamo Bay before I went to Afghanistan. So my area of expertise is counterinsurgency, counterterrorism, and I pay a particular focus on information operations, counter-propaganda. So those are my areas of expertise. Today, what I'm going to do is talk to you, and I just chose this title because you can't talk about the Gaza crisis without talking about the Red Sea, without talking about Iran, without talking about Hezbollah, without talking about Hamas, and then we get our friend Netanyahu to talk about. So this is going to be a lot to do in a very little bit of time. Now, I put this up because A, I'm not the smartest guy in the world, and B, if I could see the future, I wouldn't be here. I'd be enjoying my winnings from Powerball. So I can make some predictions, which may or may not come true. But remember, I've never gotten the right numbers for Powerball. So I want to see my stock portfolio. Okay, let's begin at the beginning so that we can situate ourselves geographically and understand the precarious situation, geopolitical situation, that Israel finds itself today. First, for those of you who have been to this region of the world, Israel is surrounded by adversaries, and it is a tiny nation. At its thinnest point, it's only 9 miles wide. So if you're wondering why the Israelis are so paranoid about their ability to sustain themselves against their adversaries, this is the reason. And then to their immediate east, the West Bank. The West Bank is partially controlled by Fatah, the political unit of the PLO, Palestinian Liberation Organization. And Hamas also has a strong presence in the West Bank. So you can see the West Bank up there to the east, directly east of Tel Aviv. To the south is where it's getting all of the press. It's the Gaza Strip, and the Gaza Strip is controlled by Hamas. And then to the north, in Lebanon, you see Hezbollah. And Hezbollah has been in control of Lebanon, or dominating Lebanon, since 1982. So you have a situation here where many of these groups, predominantly Hamas and Hezbollah, according to their doctrine, believes in the eradication of Israel as a state. So when you hear from the river to the sea, you'll have some apologists talking about, well, that's just a saying. They talk about eradicating the Israeli state. It's talking about regaining their people's influence in that region of the world. But the more you read their doctrine, the more you realize that it is about eliminating not only the governmental institutions of Israel, but also removing or eliminating Jews from that area. Now, next. Okay. When I taught at URI, I used to tell students, you really can't understand the Middle East without first thinking in terms of, suppose the Narragansetts were kicked out of Rhode Island and forced into a diaspora throughout the world. And then in the late 1940s, the United Nations decided that was unjust and that they would return their lands to them. Now, after hundreds of years of them being gone, you already had a fixed settlement of Rhode Islanders who did not want to give up their land and did not want to share their political future with a group of people that were largely coming back from elsewhere. So now you understand, at least a little bit, about the antipathy that Arabs have toward Israelis and that Israelis have toward many Arabs because of this kind of odd situation that brought back Jews to the Holy Land. Now, as you can see, approximately 14.5 million Arabs, or Palestinians, live in what they call historic Palestine, which you can see here. Now, 3.25 million live in the West Bank, 2.23 live in Gaza, but there's the total in Palestine is about 5 million. And then remember, during the series of war after war after war between the Arabs and Israelis, the Palestinians were forced out and made their way to Jordan and other countries in the region. So you have a significant diaspora among the Palestinian population, and then you have that big cleavage between Arab and Jew in today's Israel. Okay, there's the Israeli population, right? So you have about, combined 7 or 8 million Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank and throughout the region, but the Israelis have about 9 million. So you're not talking about large populations, but you're talking about a radical asymmetry in economic well-being and military power between the sides. Okay, well, exercise coming back. What do you have for dessert? Okay, let's get the major actors out of the way. And I'm going to start with the smaller groups because there's the big kahuna a little further away that we're going to discuss in a couple of minutes. First, Hamas, the Islamic resistance movement. Hamas is the group that dominates Gaza and is incredibly powerful in the West Bank as well. Okay, they are what we refer to, what legally we refer to as a terrorist organization in the United States. They won election in 2006, largely as a result of the ineptitude and corruption of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, of Fatah, in that country or that region. And then after they took power in elections, they do what the authoritarians do, they never hold elections again. So they have been in power for quite some time now. They have before the war, they had between 9,000 and 10,000, in some reports I've seen up to 20,000 fighters. I can't get into the latest because a lot of that's classified, but just say it's a lot less than 9,000 fighters left for Hamas. And it's really difficult. This is a perfect example of fog of war. It is really difficult to get good facts and information out of this particular period. You have Sambala, who is now the leader after the assassination of his predecessor just a few weeks ago. The Israelis have done what we did in Afghanistan and Iraq. We call them high-value targets. And what we do is we decapitate the leadership. And that worked out so wonderfully well for us in Afghanistan. But he's the latest leader of Hamas. Next, you have Hezbollah. This is the party that's in the it's in the north of Israel and Lebanon. These people were founded, the group was founded in 1982 by Lebanese clerics working in tandem with the Ayatollah Khomeini in Iran. In fact, the Ayatollah is responsible for naming Hezbollah, the party of Allah. It literally comes from the Ayatollah himself. There is virtually no separation between Hezbollah and Iran, and there's less and less separation between Hamas and Iran. And here's one of the ironies. The Shia-Sunni split, the Shia and Sunnis don't get along very well and are constantly in conflict. But Iran, the wise, crafty Persians, have been doing this kind of stuff for millennia. So despite the fact that Hamas is predominantly a Sunni organization, they fund and train Hamas fighters. And Hezbollah being a Shia organization, they have very close ties with Hezbollah. Remember this too, Hezbollah is much, much larger and more militarily powerful than Hamas. So they're the more formidable adversary for Israel along its own borders. Then you have the Houthis. The Houthis are a fascinating group. They're in Yemen, and they have participated and helped Hamas. In fact, they started going after shipping in the Red Sea because they wanted to demonstrate their support for Hamas. And it's driving the United States Navy crazy. And we'll talk a little bit about that later on. But we've learned a lot about how to deal with drones, ballistic missiles, and other weapon systems that the Houthis, shockingly, are quite adept at. I mean, this was an organization that was essentially insurgency in Yemen, but it is completely funded and trained and the weapons are supplied by guess who? Iran. Right? So all of these groups are dependent to a large degree on Iran. Okay, speaking of which, Iran is the puppet master. And the only way to really understand the whole situation in the Middle East is to understand the power politics of Iran. And we're going to look at Iran's long-term and short-term aims and their strategy. And the first thing you have to understand is they are formidable. They are well organized. They have a very adept strategy that was helped by the United States in our invasion of Iraq. I mean, let's face it, we made Iraq safe for Iran. And the influence that Iran has increased by since we invaded Iraq is just exponential. It's really one of the classic foreign policy mistakes of unintended consequences from the U.S. global war on terror. Okay, this is it. This is my favorite thing. It took me a half hour to do this. This is Khomeini, the leader of Iran, and this is Iran's strategy. It's literally to increase its influence throughout the region. Ultimately, its aim is to weaken the influence of the United States in the region, have the United States pull out of Iraq and Syria, and increase its overarching influence in the region without necessarily having to go to war. Okay? They are literally probing the soft underbelly of Israel and the United States. They're going to push and push and push to see what they can get away with. And they do have a formidable military. And this is one of the things that I would really criticize Republicans and Democrats and people who are right-handed and people who are left-handed. But this is one of the key things. If we ever allowed Iran to get a nuclear weapon, then their influence would radically increase and our ability to contain and deter Iran would evaporate. So that's one of the things that's very important to understand about Iran. Okay, this is what we call the Iranians call the axis of resistance. And you can see that their tentacles are spread wide throughout the region. They fund the Yemenis, the Houthis in Yemen. They are responsible for both Hamas and Hezbollah in Lebanon. And they have groups operating on their behalf and working very closely by funding them and arming them in both Iraq and in Syria. So if you look at the region and then look at the maritime, the littorals here, Iran is spreading its influence all over this region, from the Gulf of Aden to the Red Sea, all the way up. Right? So this is a concern of the United States Navy, it's a concern in the region, and their influence simply keeps growing and growing. Okay, speaking of influence. The Iranians surprised me with the level of attack that the missile attack on my birthday, April 13th. So thank you, Iran. Nice what happened here is, remember, the Iranians were responding to the assassination of a key military leader in Iran. So they felt, you know, it's one of these things, I mean, I don't know how geeky you guys are, but during the great book by Thucydides, The Peloponnesian War, and he explains that war is a result of both honor, interest, and something else. Honor, interest, fair honor, interest. And here, the honor of the Iranians was at stake. Their prestige was at stake. They felt obligated to attack Israel because of the assassination. And what happened here is a wonderful kabuki dance. Go ahead.
Minor correction, it's not an assassination. They bombed the embassy in Damascus. Right? That's when they responded, because Iran bombed their embassy in Damascus, killed 13.
Well, yeah, it was a whole series. Yeah, no, you're right. It was a whole series of things that they had not been responding to forcefully. The Ayatollah was getting more and more pressure from his military and the clerics that they had to respond. But thank you. So here, what happens is it was a failed attack. Why? Because the Americans, working together with the Jordanians, with the French, with the British, with a whole series of our allies from Europe and the region, were able to knock down the vast majority of their drones and of their ballistic missiles simultaneously. So our anti-missile capabilities and that of our allies demonstrated that we could take them out. Now, people are still arguing that Iran fired 300 missiles knowing that most of them would be taken out, or did they really try to accomplish their mission? I would argue that they were trying to accomplish something, but they had wonderful spin control. Because since it didn't take out too many people, I think one person was injured on some buildings, the Israelis didn't feel compelled to respond overwhelmingly. Also, Secretary of State Blinken was putting pressure on them to hold their fire. But you can see here that they're armed and loaded. And that if war ever breaks out in this region seriously, you're going to see a simultaneous attack from Hezbollah in the north Gaza, with Hamas in the West Bank, as well as with the Yemenis, and with Iran going directly. So this would be a terrible, terrible situation for Israel, and then Israel would unleash its full military power, and you'd have a truly terrible, terrible conflict. Okay, now, you've heard of the Black Swan, right? Something that comes out of nowhere that no one can predict. Very rarely does that happen in international politics. More so, you have the gray rhino. And the gray rhino is something we should have been paying attention to, but for some reason we didn't take seriously enough, or we ignored it. If you want to understand why the initial attack by Hamas into Israel succeeded as well as it did, it's because of the rhino. The Israelis had become arrogant. They had let themselves become more comfortable with the idea that they were protected by their surveillance systems and by their walls. And it was a truly, truly historic intelligence failure on the part of the Israelis. And remember, the Israelis are among the single best intel community in the entire world. I mean, we work very closely with them. They are top-notch. So even really good intelligence organizations can get too arrogant, and they should have known better. And Netanyahu in particular, because he was given information. Okay, so why did this attack succeed so much? First, they underestimated Hamas' capabilities. They just had become so secure in the fact that Hamas didn't really have the capability to surprise the Israelis. The Israelis believed that they had heavily infiltrated the top echelons of Hamas, and that their technological surveillance would allow them to see if they were concentrating their forces, getting ready for an attack. So it was pure hubris. And then look at that line from Netanyahu. Hamas is not that dangerous. We can't live with it. Okay, that was classic arrogance on the part of the Israeli leader. And believe me, I mean, American leaders are, we have the same kinds of problems underestimating our adversaries all the time. Now, they misunderstood Hamas' intentions. They assumed that they wouldn't attack because Israel was working with the Qataris in Gaza to bring in a significant amount of economic aid. So they were basically saying, we'll allow economic aid in there, and in exchange we'll have peace. And Hamas fed on that, because what they realized is it could lull the Israelis to sleep. Meanwhile, they are preparing for a massive, well-coordinated, well-organized attack. Next, the deception that Hamas was able to perpetrate is really a work of art. They were able to dig over 300 miles of tunnels. And these are large, deep tunnels without the Israelis knowing what was going on. And remember, Hamas was famous for digging tunnels in the first place with its border, the southern border with Egypt. So this is not something uncharacteristic of what Hamas would do. It's just they did it well. Next, confirmation bias. One of the problems that all large organizations, particularly military organizations, have. The Israelis believed that they undervalued the Hamas and ignored contradictory evidence. Netanyahu was getting information that something was going to happen, that Hamas was planning a large, large attack. And his intel chiefs were getting the same information. But what happened is they ignored it because they didn't take it seriously. And remember, this is something that's really important. I'm always fighting conspiracy theories that, Roosevelt knew about the attack on Pearl Harbor, or that, this or that, everybody knows everything. This is the one thing that I have learned in the decades, and I'm not going to tell you how many decades I have been working with the government and the military and the intelligence community. Always believe in competence, because conspiracies rely on brilliant people keeping a secret and organizing it adeptly, and it doesn't happen. human beings are idiots. We all know. Okay, including your speaker. Okay, now, we call, when I teach military strategy at War College, one of the first questions we ask our students is, what are the adversaries' policy aims, and what are their strategies in order to achieve those policy aims? So we're going to look at what Hamas's policy aims are. I've already intimated, right? From the river to the sea, the unification of Israel and Palestinian territories under Islamic rule, under their rule. And the elimination of Israel as a political entity. That is their political aim. They have short-term aims and they have long-term aims. But if you're looking for its ultimate aim, let's not make any, equivocations here. That's what their aim is. Their immediate aims are a bit more complicated. They wanted to, the reason why the attack was done when it was, in April, was because there were serious peace negotiations going on between the Israelis, the Americans, and regional countries in that area that were coming to an agreement. And the last thing Hamas wanted was an agreement, because they felt they were waylaid by the big powers discussing peace in the region, and they weren't going to get their piece of the action. And we got to remember this too. This is why when people get optimistic about the latest ceasefire potential, terrorist organizations don't want peace. They want to be able to continue their unique position in society, because that's their raison d'etre. It's not to achieve their political aims so much as it is to achieve and maintain their status in that region. So yes, would they like it if they could achieve their unification of Israel and Palestine under their rule? Yes. But their number one focus is to stay in power, by far and away. Okay? They also want to broaden the war, which has done a great job. Now you have the Houthis, the Iranians, and Hezbollah firing missiles all the time. And they want to secure release of their prisoners. And they're getting quite close to securing the release of their prisoners, because the Israeli hostages are highly valued by Israel, and the Palestinians, the Hamas fighters, have been Israeli prisoners for years. And it's a tradition between the Israelis and their adversaries is that we will release a lot more prisoners that we have than you will give back to us. In fact, several years ago, one Israeli soldier was traded for 100 terrorists. So they understand that, and they're smart to be able to play that. Okay, the invasion, why did they invade? One reason was because they wanted to break the momentum of the peace talks. They wanted to draw in Israel into the region. I have been studying non-state actors, insurgents, for decades. I've been in the battlegrounds. I've gone all over the world doing this. I've been from Sri Lanka to the Middle East, to Africa, to South America. And what insurgents want is they want the adversary to invade their territory. That's the whole point, to get the adversary to overreact. If it overreacts, they can draw them into a protracted conflict and bleed the enemy. Why? Because the insurgents are on death ground. They have nowhere else to go. So their idea is their will is going to, in the end, win out. And if you care not a whit about your own people, and you're willing to sacrifice them in order to achieve your political aims, that makes you an even more difficult adversary to defeat. Right? So that's why the process of using the Palestinians as human shields fits so neatly into Hamas's strategy. Because one, they don't care about civilian casualties. Two, it is the best public relations message that they have. They want to alienate and isolate Israel from its Western allies. They want to win the game of perceptions. That means, why are the Israelis, who are so powerful, killing so many of our people, when in reality, they're the ones who started the war and literally targeted civilians on purpose. So the idea of winning the war of perceptions is the only way that a weak actor really can win in the long run because it forces the government to change its policies. And that's what's happening in Israel now. And again, I'm not saying who's right or who's wrong, but the Israelis now have split, right? You have real tension. Netanyahu's unbelievably unpopular. You have a lot of Israelis who say, look, you gotta get my kids home, you gotta get my son, my daughter, my dad, whatever, home from being a hostage, and we don't care what it needs to, what needs to happen in order to get that. So as a result, they're causing dislocation within Israel politically. And that's all part of their strategy. Isolate it internationally, Israel, and then create dislocation and disunity within Israel itself. Okay? I think I probably get all this. Okay. And thank you for giving me the sun. I'm talking really good. Yeah. Okay. Israel's policy strategy match. Israel's policy strategy match is much more straightforward because Netanyahu has talked about this from the outset. The destruction of Hamas as a fighting organization. This is one of the things I teach my students all the time. If your policy, the more narrowly focused and defined your policy aims are, the more likely you are to achieve those policy aims. If you go with broad policy aims, it's going to be a very difficult thing to attain. If on the other hand, you define the political purpose this narrowly, then you have a much better chance. And what Netanyahu has done is defined it very broadly. You are never going to destroy Hamas. Hamas is as much of an idea as it is an organization. And as long as the people in Gaza are unhappy, you're going to have an organization like Hamas. So that was Israel's first mistake. The second aim, of course, is to get the release of the hostages. Now, what is their strategy? Their strategy was about as subtle as a bomb going off in Gaza. It is basically to go in there and clean it up. Just literally level it or go after Hamas leadership as much as possible. And here's the difficulty. Even though Israeli rules of engagement are that you are supposed to minimize civilian casualties, you have an adversary in Hamas that uses people as a shield. So they are literally building tunnels and operating out of mosques, out of schools, out of hospitals, because they know that the Israelis have to come in and root them out. And they also know that when they do that, they're going to get lots of international coverage saying how brutal the Israelis are. So you don't give your adversary a choice. You either accept that the fighters are going to remain intact, or you're going to have to kill some civilians. And it's a real trap that they've set. And unfortunately, the Israelis have decided that it was time to do it anyway. Okay. They want to prevent Hamas's resurgence and take over the Palestinian system. Okay, this is what they want. They are afraid that they're going to go in and they're going to mow the lawn, and they're going to cut it really short. But then after that, that lawn's going to grow again, and Hamas is going to come right back. So they want to say, well, what do we do to stop this for a long period of time? Well, we can go in there and root them out. We can kill their leadership. We can kill their fighters. But this old saying that Don Rumsfeld, of all people, looking for wisdom from Don, this doesn't come very easily, said, look, in Afghanistan and Iraq, he said, I'm not sure that we're creating more terrorists than we're killing. And that's the big question that's happening here. Are the Israelis ultimately creating more Hamas fighters than they are killing? Is this the worst thing that the Israelis can do? And frankly, there's no good answer. And remember, in war, it's passion that takes over. It's always, we always think of war between two adversaries and what's happening. But it's a psychological contest as well. And it's a contest internally with the leadership, military and political leadership, fighting what is cold, rational calculations, and the passion and the anger and the hatred that comes with warfare. And passion very often overwhelms logic and reason. I mean, we were in Afghanistan for 20 years when it was patently obvious we needed to get out of there by 2007. So again, we're not immune to these problems. And then their day after plan. And what the Israelis want to do, and it's going to be very difficult for them to do this, is create an international trusteeship with regional actors, the United States, and the UAE, and Saudi Arabia predominantly, taking control, or at least having a large organizational framework that helps keep the peace, basically peacekeepers. That's not going to happen. That's just not going to happen. And Netanyahu knows that. Okay, speaking of tunnels, 300 miles. This is an infrared shot of the tunnels. Okay, Israel really had no idea it was that sophisticated. And you can see that these tunnels literally run across the entire Gaza Strip. And to give you an idea of these tunnels, here's a knockoff. Okay, these are not just tunnels that you like you see in the old prisoner of war movies, where they're just creating a tunnel under the fences. These are sophisticated, deep, well-planned, well-ventilated systems with multiple outlets, so that if the Israelis discover them, you still have time in places to get out, right? This is why the Israelis have a hard time killing Hamas fighters. And they can pop in and pop out anywhere they want. So just when the Israelis think, okay, we've cleared this territory, what happens is Hamas, when the Israelis come in big time, Hamas just, moves underground, right? And that's one of the things that's really important about understanding why the Israelis are never going to really root them out. Yes?
Where did all the dirt go?
Do you know that was the first question I asked? Because there's so much construction. They were really clever about using that for other construction sites. I don't know how these really missed it. I don't, but they were really clever. Again, they underestimated the Hamas fighters. That's the first question I asked. Okay, now let's look at the maritime because they pay me a salary, so I gotta go Navy here. But if you're looking at Yemen, Yemen uses a series of relatively rudimentary ballistic missiles together with drones. And they are now learning how to coordinate the attacks on shipping using ballistic and drones, as well as, and this is what the Navy is really afraid of, you have three types of drones: air drones, surface drones, and then underwater drones. If you can combine all three, they're going to get really lucky one of these days and sink an American ship, or at least damage it significantly. And the fact that it hasn't happened says a lot about the sailors we have out to sea and their expertise. But it's going to happen if this continues. It is going to happen. So be prepared for this. Hope by God that it doesn't. But then you can see how many ships, how many American and European ships have been sent to the region to try to patrol this. And remember, what you have is the Suez Canal over here. 25 to 30% of all trade goes through the Suez Canal. So they're very smart. The Houthis understand that they're going to disrupt the global economy, and they're going to force the international community to pay more attention to them. And they're completely funded by the Iranians, and their weapons are smuggled into the system. They don't have any productive capability, whatever. It's all Iranian military equipment. And this, you don't hear about this a lot. It's amazing we don't hear about this. And that's because the Navy's have done a very good job. But this isn't going away. Yeah. Sure. Actually, I'm almost done. Okay. Oh, I'm done.
We have 20 minutes for questions.
Oh, great.
Is it true on the day of the attack, the October 6th attack, that it took some 8 or 9 hours before Israeli troops got to the place of the attack?
Yeah, sure. Is it true that it took 8 or 9 hours before the Israelis were able to really adeptly counter the invasion, the attack? perpetrated by Hamas. Yes, it's true, it was a holiday, it was a weekend. Again, they had not taken Hamas seriously. Top leadership was just not even aware of it. And when it did happen, the communications didn't work as well. The Hamas took out their cameras very quickly. So they essentially took the eyes out of the Israeli military to see what was happening. And then there were literally people taking out their guns. Locals, local IDF people coming out, taking out their guns, and then trying to save as many civilians as possible. It was horrific because the Israelis should have known better. And again, when you go there, when you talk to the IDF, all they do all the time is they tell you, look, we're on the razor's edge here. We always have to be prepared. That's our motto. Be prepared. Don't let any surprises occur. And it just demonstrated that they were completely unprepared for it. Again, these things happen. I always tell my students, about this, but I always tell them that war is the most complex human endeavor imaginable. Therefore, no one is smart enough to wage war well. It's just too complicated. The generals and the admirals love it when I say this. What you have to do is you have to be less incompetent than your adversary. And that's frankly how I obtained it my entire life. Less incompetent. Did I answer your question?
Yes.
It's shocking how.
I have a question. When you look at what's going on in the West Bank and the way they're sort of decimating the Palestinians there, wouldn't you say it was fair to say the Israelis' objective is to take over the whole place? They're not, that's from the river to the sea. Let's look at it the other way.
There are no good guys, there are no bad guys anymore. Even in American politics. But one of the things that I find interesting is Israel is going through what, into a much lesser degree, the United States is, where the center is losing hold and the extremes on both sides, particularly in Israel, the right-wing extremes. And I think what happened is that Netanyahu is Machiavellian enough to realize that he has to play to the extremes. So he's looking the other way. It was just recently, last week, where extremists went into the villages and just shot willy-nilly some Palestinians. So until Netanyahu gets out of power, the Israeli government has got to then do a much better job of both reining in their extremists. And that's going to be a very difficult thing. So it's really a shame. I've been going there for a long period of time. My bias has always been toward the Israelis. But the more I go there, I realize if I were a Gazan, if I were living in Gaza, I would probably, hate the Israelis as well, or in the West Bank. It's a very difficult situation, and no matter what you say when you're talking about this, which is why I hate doing this kind of stuff, you're always going to anger someone. But there is no real right and wrong. There's just degrees of it in the Middle East. Yes, sir.
Would you talk a little bit about Jordan's role in the conflict and maybe some of the other Arab states?
Jordan is trying to play a constructive role. First of all, Jordan is very concerned with the number of Palestinian refugees that they have had to deal with over the last several decades. And they have a problem with Palestinian camps and the radicalization of Palestinians in those camps. So it is in their long-term interest, their short and long-term interest, to try to get something settled. And Jordan has always been one of the states that's more pragmatic and looking for, okay, we want to get along with the Israelis, we want to get along with our Arab neighbors. They're always looking for a middle ground. So I wish the rest of the Middle East were Jordan. They're much more pragmatic. Their role is they participate in some of these negotiations. I know Blinken usually goes to Jordan when he's in the Middle East. So it's one of the countries that's playing more constructive role. UAE, United Arab Emirates, the Qataris, they play it both ways. It's like much of international politics where they are funding and helping support Hamas. On the other hand, they want to have good relations with the United States. So they're trying to play the intermediary. And they have a fascinating, look, if you trust anyone in the Middle East about anything, you're a fool. It's just that way. All right.
Yeah, I was just wondering, you talked about Hamas wanting to withdraw the war, but to what extent is it possible that Netanyahu has the same idea, because he's assassinating people in Iran, adding extra conditions to the possible negotiations to keep himself in power in part, and also to keep the U.S. Supplying them with all the military training.
The parallels are uncanny between Hamas and Netanyahu. Hamas' goal is to stay in power, right? Hamas' goal is to make sure that they're still getting in, right? Well, that's Netanyahu's goal. One is a democratic state that hopefully can resolve these issues and move on. The other is an authoritarian regime, or not a regime, an organization. Again, one would hope, but I agree. It's hard. When the news broke, I was just talking to Jerry about this, Netanyahu accepting some of the terms. The problem is Hamas has to accept these new terms. And I honestly don't believe that either one really wants this to happen. And if you hear about it, take it with a grain of salt, because I guarantee there's going to be problems and it's going to break down. Because that's just the nature. It's not a hard prediction. Sir?
Can you comment on how well Israeli public opinion is mirrored by the Israeli political leadership now?
It's not. I mean, Netanyahu has marginal support now, only on the extremes. Even some of his major military leaders and members of the cabinet have withdrawn. So he is increasingly isolated, and it's a very dangerous situation when the leader's isolated. That means they're paying down the power no matter what, or as long as they can. So in terms of his popularity, polls have him way down right now. So he's very unpopular. And I always use that parallel with Putin. When Putin feels threatened personally, he's going to lash out. So when Netanyahu feels threatened, you can have much more assertive, more aggressive. So, something back, sir.
Could I contradict your account a little bit?
Sure. You would be the first.
Okay. First of all Israeli historians now agree that Israel has engaged in ethnic cleansing in 1948. That's where Gaza originates. Most of Gazans, it's crammed with people on top of each other, suffocated, starved by Israel. Their diet controls half of the population is children. Israel has been bombing them every couple of years. Whenever anything happens, they just reserve the right to assassinate at any time. If Gazans respond, Israel goes full force. The ethnic cleansing is still ongoing in the West Bank, destroying homes, conquering settlements. It's not just extremist settlers, it's Israeli government behind them, protecting them. So there's an ongoing, sorry if I can continue a little bit, a couple of years, 4 years ago, 3 years ago, all international human rights organizations declared Israel an apartheid state in all of its land. So I don't know what time do we start using the term terrorism in reference to what Israel is doing. Now it's accused of genocide, of starving Palestinians, of stopping the food, stopping the water. We are talking about a genocide and we are supporting that. We are there to protect them. The source of Hezbollah is directly, Hezbollah was born because of Israeli wanton destruction of Beirut. They were responding. Well, for a year, there was nothing across the board. Israelis were responding to an anti-PLO organization for assassinating somebody in London, trying to assassinate their ambassador in London. But Hezbollah was there to free Lebanon of Israeli control, and they succeeded in 2000.
Is there a question?
No, there's no question. I'm just contradicting the account. I asked for permission if I can do that. Iran signed on a nuclear deal, accepted search of all their facilities, but Trump negated that, and Biden kept that negation.
First of all, the nuclear program would not have ended. It would have given a 10-year review. And they were.
But Israel hasn't.
Hold on.
Yeah.
And in 5 years, they were able to then start with their missile systems and all of the what's the term? Iran was going to be able to buy weapon systems and it wasn't going to be embargoed anymore. So I was a very big critic of the deal in the Obama administration. I thought Trump characteristically just went too far the other way. But if you think that that agreement was a good agreement, it was not a good agreement. And the vast majority of American military didn't think it was a good agreement.
I mean, only Israel and the United States are allowed to have nuclear weapons.
I do not want a terrorist organization that nuclear weapons.
Why is Israel not a terrorist organization?
Okay. But we could go on.
I'm sorry, keep going with the other questions.
No, I
just made my point. I think that's the account that's coming up a lot recently. People starting to see what's going on. That the Israelis are the aggressors here. They are the ethnic.
Well, they're not the aggressors. They're responding to a massive
well,
attack.
they chose the.
We have. Let me agree with you. Let me agree with some of the things that we've said. Okay. First of all, the settlements, the expansion of settlements is not only immoral, it's unwise politically on the part of the Israelis. And it's unnecessarily aggressive, and it causes more harm than good. And the fact that the Israeli, particularly Netanyahu, continues to do that demonstrates that he's not serious about stabilizing the region. So I agree with a lot of what you said. I think the Israelis have made many mistakes and have acted egregiously in terms of responding to the aggression of both Hezbollah and Hamas in the region. But like I said, it's hard to find good guys and bad guys in this area. In this situation, I understand both adversaries. You know, some have said, know yourself and know your enemy, and $100 will never fail. Well, the more you know the adversaries in here, the more you realize that all of them are to blame. That they've all made critical mistakes. That they've all made morally reprehensible decisions. Why? Because in war, passion often wins out. Right? So to say that one side is right and one side is wrong, I think is to oversimplify. Sir,
I would argue that the settlement crisis has been going on for decades, so it's not in the passion of war, it's a policy that was from the absolute beginning that they were going to walk over these people.
Have you been in a battlefield?
I'm arguing that this is happening.
No, but I'm sorry, when you are seeing your friends, your comrades dying, when you start seeing the graves being dug on both sides, when political and military leaders see that their careers are on the line, when military leaders send people into harm's way and have their troops killed, that creates passion. And as much as human beings want to be able to understand and to differentiate between their emotions and their reason, it's hard. It's so very hard. So passion, in my experience, tends to just dominate in so many ways. And it takes a true leader to be able to separate themselves. But there aren't that many people who have that kind of moral courage and intellectual heft that can do that. I don't mean to sound cynical, but...
I agree with this gentleman, who I did not come with.
You want to exchange names?
I've been thinking for a long time, and I think this is what he said, was that this policy of moving into the West Bank and taking over the Palestinian territory, that it's a very small territory they were rented into by the English, let's face it.
Yeah.
That this has been going on for many, many decades, and that the frustration of the Palestinians was going to erupt. And this is not obviously the first time this has happened, but you see, even during this whole, leading up to the invasion, to this terrible attack, which nobody, of course, would ever apologize for. I mean, it's just hideous what the Hamas did. But that the reason they got sympathy was because there was so much aggravation perpetrated by the Israelis, and it seems to have been from the top. And certainly Netanyahu has been encouraging it this entire time.
I agree. I agree. Look, that's why I started out talking about Narragansett going back to Rhode Island. Because that allows you to see it from both perspectives. And the policies that the Israelis have pursued, part of it is that they feel like they are being encroached on, and that this is another thing that I have a chance to talk about. The demographic time bomb is going off in Israel. Arabs are having many more kids than Israelis, and so the apartheid that we were talking about is becoming more and more difficult to sustain. So there's a moral vacuum among Israeli leadership that needs to be changed. And there is a horrific, violent anger, hatred on the part of Hamas and Hezbollah that is exploited by individuals who want to gain power and retain it. And if you think for one moment Hamas cares about its people, think about what they're doing. If you cared about your people, you wouldn't use them as human shields. So, one of the things that human beings are capable of wonderful love and all that stuff, and it's groovy and reattached. But what I found about human beings more is that they are unbelievably capable of incredible evil. I mean, it's the only way to say it. I mean, I always have when students tell me, hey, Putin's evil. I mean, Putin's insane. No, he's not. He's really smart. He's just an evil son of a bitch. You say that ever? And I can go through leader after leader, and some of the people I interviewed in Gitmo in 2003, 2004. I mean, I was amazed at how, wow, it's hard for me to even describe how their attitudes were.
I think on that happy note.